Hi, this is Paul. A lot of people have noticed in the comment section, we talk about this fairly often, and I bring it up, that lack of telos, or ends, ultimate goals, is the great Achilles heel of every secular moral system. And, we've been dealing this with Jordan Peterson stuff and John Vervaeke. Everyone wrestles with this in a secular system. You can't help but wrestle with it because there are, in a sense, no guiding stars. C.S. Lewis, in two of his books, in The Problem of Pain in the first chapter, I've noted this in a variety of other videos, not only are there the five senses, he sort of outlines two more. There's the sense of the numinous he talks about, and moral intuitions. And it's really in The Abolition of Man that C.S. Lewis works on what he calls the Tao, which is, he says, traditional morality. And in the appendix of The Abolition of Man, he goes through and shows commonality between many moral systems, and he calls this traditional morality. And he's talking about Gaius and Titius, two textbook authors who attempt to basically say that we just have mere moral feelings rather than intuitions of truths that are out there in the world, but we can't fully, we don't really fully grasp them, nor can we explain them, but they are in fact out there. We all know it, and even as Lewis notes in that very small book, The Abolition of Man, we all know it, but attempts to free ourselves of it are always based on it itself. Our attempts to update it or improve it are always based on the same Tao. In other words, there's no escape. Now, for Jordan Peterson, his maps of meaning for Jordan Peterson is sort of an internal compass, and that's broken down in one of his 12 rules. Do what is meaningful and not what's expedient. Meaning for Jordan Peterson is an internal compass which will lead you towards opportunity, wellness, goodness, etc. And Peterson, again, I often call him sort of an open agnostic in this, because he doesn't really fully... He doesn't want to fully be embedded or buffered within the secular system. He lives within it for his science. He plays within it for his vocation and all of that. But he always wants to leave the door open, and you see this consistently with Peterson. But yet, so we're worried about our guiding stars, and so Peterson. Part of the reason he does the biblical series and works on this is because he has the hope that the Bible, via his Darwinian ideas, that perhaps the Bible can offer better wisdom, because again, it's very ancient, it's battle tested, it's endured, and so in that sense, for Peterson, it's Darwinian. We have reason to believe the old book. But the attackers of Jordan Peterson are doing what they feel to be meaningful as well. And attacking Jordan Peterson feels meaningful to them. And this is part of the problem with using meaning alone as an internal compass. And again, I would say that Peterson doesn't want to do this, which is why he does biblical series. That there's a piece of him that's longing and hoping that the Bible can be for him what it is for what he might say is naively for other believers. He might not even use that term naive. So Peterson's such a liminal figure in many of these conversations. And so that's part of the reason that he gets pulled into this battle over the Bible or traditional morality, because Peterson, when it comes down to it, he's sort of a scientific traditionalist. Now, John Vervaeke's work, as we've been following his video series just recently, he talked about telos in one of the videos. And again, John's whole project is to create a religion that isn't a religion. There's no confidence in systems built upon God number two for John. He's very clear about being a physicalist, yet he respects religion. And so John's working very hard in his long argument about that. And so his goal is to build a system affording what religion had afforded, but his construction of it is scientific, using cognitive science and philosophy, and it's from below. And the goal of that is to keep it scientific, and therefore I think in many ways in this secular realm public. Now, at the end of this video, I'm going to play quite a bit from a podcast a couple of different podcasts that Tom Holland has done, because I think that's very helpful in terms of understanding what secular is and the relationship between Christianity and secularism, which is something that I've been talking about throughout my 2 years of making videos. But I think, and again, part of John's project is, if there is no God number two, if you are not a theist, then it is up, or at least a theist of a certain kind, then it is up to us to save ourselves. And then the question is, can we create these communities and these wisdom institutions and these practices in order to, and can they be disseminated, and will they go viral to sufficient degree to save ourselves from the troubles that we are facing? And I think this is one of the serious challenges that the world faces, and one of the serious challenges. I mean, John and I disagree on whether you can continue to go back to these traditional religions of which I obviously am a part, or must we construct something new, and do we actually have the wisdom and insight and capacity to construct something new that can address the world in the way it needs to be addressed? Now, before I had software problems, I had made a video on this conversation between Steven Pinker and Jordan Peterson. Let's see, I'm trying to remember. Okay. This conversation between Steven Pinker and Jordan Peterson. The Enlightenment project for Pinker has given us what we need, Pinker says, and the world has improved dramatically. Now, again, part of the reason I recommend John Vervaeke's series is that whether or not you necessarily agree with let's say the outcome of his project, which is a religion, which is not a religion, John does so much helpful teaching along the way. And again, so many of the things that I've picked up along the way in John's course, the understanding of categories and relevance. The world has dramatically improved. We might say that, but it's interesting because others, of course, are saying that 12 years until the end of the world, 12 years until the point of no return on climate change. We've been living in a nuclear age, as C.S. Lewis calls it, for quite a long time now. People perhaps have more material well-being, having mode, and perhaps being mode. So it'd be fun to have Pinker and Vervaeke have a conversation, because the dissonant voices that we hear, things are getting better. Things are, things aren't the way they used to be. Things are getting worse. As a pastor, I hear all the time from people, sometimes with a theological spin on it, or an eschatological spin on it. Well, things are getting worse and worse, so Jesus must be coming soon. I remember my parents' generation hearing people of that generation saying that, and I just can't believe that Jesus won't come before the year 2000 because things are getting so bad, he just has to come back. And what's funny is that the older I get, the more and more I wonder, well, how can the world go on? There are so many problems. Maybe it's just a function of age that I see the problems more clearly. But Pinker is, people sometimes comment that I'm such an open, friendly, optimistic guy. Well, Pinker's kind of like me in that sense, in that he's very optimistic, and he's very friendly, and he's very open, and he just, things are getting better, and we're doing great, and poverty is being reduced, and we're gonna find technical solutions to all of these problems. Now, I played a good bit of Brett Weinstein's Four Frontier video and that talk. And I thought that was a tremendous talk. I really learned a lot in that talk too. But, can we find technical solutions? Well, these bottlenecks that we run into, and, human history seems to have, for particular groups, again, you've got the whole problem of categorization in there, but a group Europeans find North America, and I really enjoyed that book, 1493, because Europeans come and basically, through a lot of death, especially at first, so many people died in those early colonies, but basically New England stabilized, and eventually the drug cartel of tobacco really got going, and tobacco, made the mid-Atlantic and southern states rich on getting the world hooked on nicotine. So, and then America took off, and the Europeans terraformed the rest of the continent. Last weekend I had a church trip up to Portland, and I was looking around that city, and I thought that in some ways this area feels so much like the East Coast, because they get rain, unlike we here in California, the Golden State. What people don't tell you, if you're not from California, is when we say golden, we really mean brown, dormant grass, because the state is covered with so much of it for so much of the year. But Portland was so lush, and it had the sense of, well, this is sort of like the East Coast, but on a bigger scale, bigger trees and bigger mountains, and just beautiful, beautiful country, but very much terraformed from the East Coast, which apparently came over from Europe with the ships, of course, at the expense of the indigenous population that we supplanted. So we find technical solutions to face these challenges, and we look at improvements against poverty, but we also look at other sorts of problems like the burning of the rainforests, and on and on and on these debates go. So Pinker is he full member of the IDW? I don't know if anybody's keeping score on that anymore. He's the IDW-ish, is he IDW adjacent? But even so, he's very much on the sunny side, which makes him and Peterson an interesting pair, because Peterson is, of course, a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit more depressive, a little bit more dour, and they've had a number of conversations on and off, and I found those conversations interesting, and I want to play some of that. But they share some of the sunnier IDW optimism for the world of technical improvements against poverty and some of these other things. But Peterson is, of course, more sober. Peterson, of course, fears that the West will lose its way and succumb to the bloody postmodern neo-Marxism. And whereas you'll hear Pinker really try to diminish the role of Christianity in the Enlightenment, Peterson with Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro, of course, is the member of the IDW who's actually a religious practitioner. So Peterson very much wants to bring in Judeo-Christian, that whole theme, into it. And so let's play some of that, because that's a good conversation. And they begin with what I'll call contractual nationalism versus ethno-nationalism. And yeah, let's jump into that conversation.
If it is the case that people are more likely to be generous to those that they see in some sense as their in-group, then what it suggests is that you need to take the mosaic of your culture, the African Canadians and the European Canadians and the Asian Canadians, the same in the US, and have them maintain their culture and their traditions, but also to embed them inside a broader game that constitutes the national identity, that unites them all despite their differences. And it seems...
Now I think what Peterson is promoting here is a sort of narrative nationalism that and I think Peterson is right with this. And David Brooks often strikes this theme on some of his work, that story is the machine code of identity for human beings. And so if human beings are going to bond, there really needs to be a story within which we are embedded. And in that sense, we can, in fact, create family members. He goes back to the Darwinian position that, well, there seems to be a biological mechanism by which we prefer blood relatives to us, but by use of a storyverse can trump, and we know this, storyverse can trump kind of the the biological levels and the genetic levels, and via that way you have the hope of maybe having productive, fruitful nations. This, of course, is something that David Brooks has spoken about quite a bit, because what he's seen, and I think what Peterson shares in a lot of this, is the idea that a lot of the social justice factions, what they are doing is attacking the narrative stories that have traditionally sort of bound nations like the United States together. And if founding fathers are dismissed as slave owners, which, Jefferson and Washington were, dismissed as slave owners, dismissed as contaminated and illegitimate because of their moral behavior, the question is then, what container then allows the various ethnic, blood-related, racial, or whatever other identity story is operating? Can you, in fact, find a united narrative that brings the group together? Now, I'm going to assert a little bit later on that the beginnings of this story, in many ways on the world scale, come with Christianity. Because what happens, and you see this in the New Testament, what happens is that now you find Jesus saying it, God can raise up children out of Abraham. It is not the blood of Abraham that matters in order to create the new family of God, the new chosen people, the new priesthood to the nations. It is now the blood of Christ. But when we say the blood of Christ, we don't mean literal blood of Christ, because to the best of our knowledge, Jesus left no children, but unlike Genghis Khan. But Jesus, through that story and through the breaking of the bread and through the rituals, what happens in that religion, and I think Adam would be very excited to hear me say this, what religion does is takes disparate groups of people who are not biologically related and binds them into one community and one family through a story. And this is what happens in the New Testament. And if you have eyes to see this, especially in the book of Acts, you'll find this over and over and over again. The Ethiopian eunuch goes, now I know many of you don't know too many Bible stories. Well, you should read your Bible and learn them, because these stories are, in fact, the basis for much of our civilization. But the Ethiopian eunuch, where's he from? He's from Africa. Okay, he's an African slave. Now, he's an African slave of great wealth and power, because slavery was a different thing, but Ethiopian eunuch was an African slave. Well, how do I know he was a slave? Because he was a eunuch. Because unlike, let's say, the Bidens or the Trumps, one of the ways that they prevented the servants of the empire having split loyalties was they castrated them so they wouldn't have children. It was a corruption protection strategy. And so the Ethiopian eunuch is an African slave of immense wealth and power who somehow had heard about the Jewish God, and so travels to Jerusalem, but he gets to the temple and he realizes, because he's altered something that is against the Mosaic law, the Ethiopian eunuch is not allowed to enter into the temple to worship as a believer, as in a sense. He can never become a Jew. So on his way back from the festival in Jerusalem, of course, the Holy Spirit sends the deacon Philip, and Philip is running alongside the chariot, and the Ethiopian eunuch is trying to read the book of Isaiah, and Philip says, "Do you need any help reading this?" Now, Philip has a Greek name, which leads us to believe, like all the deacons, that Philip's background is he's got Jewish ancestry, but he's culturally very acclimated to the broader Eastern Roman Empire Greek world, so he's a perfect guy to engage this Ethiopian eunuch in talking about, okay, what does this book of Isaiah say? And then, of course, he talks to this Ethiopian about Jesus, for whom the Ethiopian's castration is no longer an obstacle, and the Ethiopian says, "What is keeping me from being baptized?" And Philip's like, "Nothing." And so he is baptized, and that's the story in the book of Acts. But you find this story in the book of Acts again and again, that this whole idea of narrative nationalism actually comes from Christianity And that's what we have been practicing in the West, that you can be a citizen of the United States without being from a particular ethnic group. Now, of course, the United States struggled with this, but the idea is that what holds us together is a common story. So in some ways, the American strategy of e pluribus unum, out of many one, is a borrowed idea from the New Testament and from Christianity. And this is, in fact, what Peterson is proposing right here to Steven Pinker.
Seems like, given what you just described, that unless you can forge that trans-ethnic or trans-racial identity, that you motivate people to be less generous in their social policies. So
well, that is true, and I consider this to be one of the key ideas of coming out of the Enlightenment, opposed by the counter-Enlightenment of the 19th century, by the Romantics and the nationalists.
Now it's interesting because you would have to ask the question, well, where does the Enlightenment get this idea? And again, I'm arguing that you can find this idea very strongly in the Book of Acts in the New Testament and in the Apostle Paul.
That a state, a group of people under the jurisdiction of a government, are held together basically by a social contract, by an agreement that we're all in this together. There are many public goods that we share, public costs that we can suffer. A government that allows us to get along by serving in our interests is a way of improving our welfare.
Now, what's interesting here, what he's taken is a narrative and he's turned it into a contractual situation. Now, the thing about a contract is contracts tend to be short term. I often talk about this difference, let's say, in the difference between a covenant, which is a marriage, and a contract. And what's happened, in fact, to marriage in America is it has gone from a covenant, which is till death do us part, in sickness and in health, for better, for poorer. This is idea that come what may, I will be with you. That's a covenant. And even when I get the short end of the stick, I am giving myself to you. That's a covenant. A contract is sort of, as long as this is working for me, I'm in it. But so right now, every 2 years I sign up for my contract with AT&T or Comcast or Verizon, and at the end of the 2-year mark, when my contract is done, I go shopping. And what I often do is I'll switch from AT&T to Verizon, back and forth, because these businesses are giving incentives to hop from the other person. So I just keep going back and forth. So I was on Comcast, now I'm on AT&T, but I really like that fiber. So I'll have to see, I'm going to go visit for Comcast and say, hey, this is the deal I got from AT&T. Can you make this deal better? Then I go back to AT&T and say, hey, AT&T, Comcast is offering this. Can you make that deal better? I play one against each other. That's the contract. Now what you see is that, well, we sort of have a contract as nation, but identity and our lives are not anywhere near as portable as my cell phone number with AT&T or Verizon. And in fact, because I'm not portable. And so part of what happens with nationalism is nationalism also becomes sort of a pseudo-religion because it affords me an identity. I'm an American, and that identity is not contractual so much as covenantal. And so it's interesting where Peterson was talking about a narrative in which we're embedded. Now Pinker comes up with something much more contractual, which I think is quite a bit weaker.
It's a very different conception of a nation than the blood and soil nationalism of the 19th century, continuing well into the 20th.
Okay, but now what Pinker is saying, well, there's contractual nationalism versus ethno-nationalism, but what about narrative nationalism? I mean, it's not, we tend to always look at dualities because we have a difficult time keeping many things in our mind at once, but I think we can move up to 3 here. And so Peterson starts, what about narrative nationalism as opposed to ethno-nationalism? And Pinker says, well, contractual nationalism, but I don't think contractual nationalism and and narrative nationalism are really on the same page because of the difference, let's say, between a covenant and a contract.
That what makes us a nation is that we're all white. We all come from the same ancestry, and that the successful nations are often ones that manage to forge this somewhat artificial identity.
Yeah, so that's also fascinating, because then we got two.
Okay, it's forging all identity. I think right there, Pinker sort of gives away, because sometimes people will try to derive an identity from, are you an Android or an Apple, an iOS person? Well, that's a little bit deeper, because your AT&T and Verizon can come and go, but you stick with Apple or you stick with Android. And so, again, when we talk about identity, narrative creates identity much more than contract.
Two arguments here for that, let's say, artificial or conceptual nation building process. One is that maybe you can allow people in their different ethnic and racial groups to maintain key elements of their identity and feel comfortable doing so, but also embed them in a broader game, like a game that's voluntarily played and laid out. But
see, now Peterson is trying to nuance the conversation. He's had very much narrative nationalism. Pinker had contractual nationalism. Now Peterson says, well, let's talk game instead, and maybe we can nuance these two things together, and maybe we can find some common ground.
Exactly.
By the same token, given your logic, that's also the most effective antidote to the kind of nationalism that is identitarian, that also seems to be in the resurgence. And you see this, I really see this as having been done extraordinarily effectively in the United States. Now, they had the advantage of the examples of England and France, but the American...
we had some of the mechanics of England and France, but England and France were also, to a degree, well, they were empires. We're going to talk about empires in a minute, but they were fairly homogeneous, at least as compared to, let's say, what America had to deal with in terms of the, there were British colonies at first, but, Germans came over, African slaves were brought over, indigenous peoples were in America, so on and so forth.
Experiment was an experiment in conceptual nation building. It's like, here's exactly a set of principles that we can all agree on despite our differences. And to the degree that we decide that we will agree on these principles, then we're the same enough. We can cooperate. We don't need to revert to nationalism or
no, very much.
Now it's important with the American experiment to recognize that one of the things that America did was religion, again, had been the thing that had bound people together and gave them identity. Before, in Europe, there was before there was a France and an England and a Spain, everyone was Christian, and it was their Christian identity that brought them together. And the church, after the fall of the Roman Empire, was the institution that facilitated this great identity thing in Europe. And of course, what happens in America to try and address the ongoing religious violence that had been happening in Europe was, at least at the federal level, they had in the American Constitution the Establishment Clause, where the country would not establish a state church. America would not use religion as a foundation for establishing a common identity. Now, one of the things that you notice in the history of the Protestant Reformation is that the Reformation really takes hold in places where nations aren't as, France was already well along the way in terms of being a nation and having a national identity. England was well on its way, and the process of the English Reformation was very different from that of, let's say, the Holy Roman Empire, where the Reformation begins. Spain, of course, manages to resist the Protestant Reformation. The Frenchmen like John Calvin, who find themselves out of step with the regime in France become refugees in Switzerland, in some of the French-speaking areas of Switzerland. And of course, John Calvin then more or less is able to colonize Geneva in his quest. Now, I just noted that I was just doing a little bit of work on Voltaire and Rousseau, and noted how Rousseau grew up in Geneva, a little bit after Calvin's regime, but very, very interesting. So what happens in America is, again, another step in terms of secularization, that sort of what Americans do, that while there's a strong deism in the Declaration of Independence, the American Constitution is godless and secular. Where there's a creator in the Declaration of Independence, there's no God in the Constitution, and intentionally so. Now, that didn't mean that in early conceptions that the states couldn't have their own religion, because of course the Puritans and the Pilgrims in New England were reformed, and you had different things going on with Quakers in Pennsylvania and Rhode Island, and you had Roger Williams in Rhode Island, who really brought some of the religious freedom from the Netherlands, and you've got the Anglicans in Virginia. So all of this stuff is going on. But again, this American experiment is another developmental step in secularism, which sort of works on the question, this tension between a narrative nationalism and a contractual nationalism. Now, the deists, Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence, very much borrowing it from John Locke, very deistically. You'll notice, though, that as the certainly by the time I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, you had Schoolhouse Rock, and you had full-blown American narrative nationalism in place. And that was, that's very deep in the American consciousness. Before we continue with these two, however, I did want to talk a little bit more about empire, though, because what they're really talking about in terms of binding people together is empire. So I'm going to use a little bit from Yuval Harari's *Sapiens*, because I appreciated this little section he has about empire. And empire is a political order with two important characteristics. First, to qualify for that designation, you have to rule over a significant number of distinct peoples. Okay? Now, these are different ethnic groups. These are different tribal groups. You have to rule over a significant number of them, each possessing a different cultural identity and a separate territory. How many peoples exactly? 2 or 3 is not sufficient. 20 or 30 is plenty. Imperial threshold passes somewhere in between. Second, empires are characterized by flexible borders and potentially unlimited appetite. They can swallow, digest more and more nations and territories without altering their basic structure or identity. Now, in terms of the Bible, empire is a very interesting term, because when you come to something like, let's say, the Book of Daniel, and have Daniel 7, where these monsters come out of the sea in Daniel's dream, these monsters are empires, and what they are consuming are nations, people groups. And the theme about empire is a very interesting one throughout the Bible. Now, the Israelites get their own empire under David and Solomon, but it's rather short-lived, and the Israelites there in that middle land between the powers of Mesopotamia and the power of Egypt never managed to hold on to empire very long, and the only empire they can really hold on to is the subjugation of their neighbors. David manages, unlike Saul, to subdue the Philistines, but then manages to suppress the Ammonites and the Edomites and the other surrounding peoples, and Aram, and to have them pay David tribute. And what happens after the breakup of the Israelite empire is that they're constantly having to deal with the other people groups around them, who, again, if you read the book of Genesis, these are their cousins. Okay, and so it's very much, even the imperial thing has has blood ties. And you'll notice that Abram himself is a wandering Aramean. He comes from the north. Hagar comes from Egypt. And you always see these going back and forth with Egypt. And of course, the Israelites go into Egypt for refuge from the famine. They become slaves in Egypt. And you have all of these narratives within the family as such. And the book of Genesis basically maps out the nations of the world to sort of get the familial connections between them. But now empires come around, and what empires do is they are genocidal in a sense. They destroy nations. And another big aspect of this imperial change comes with respect to religion. When Jerusalem is destroyed and the temple is destroyed, and the Book of Ezekiel is a very important book in this transition, because here the whole idea of who God is changes. But now pay attention to what empires are. Empires bind people together with religion. Now, again, I've been reading a lot of Tom Holland lately, and I'd very much recommend his books. They're fun reads. There's tons of history in them. But, you know, the Roman Empire, you can pretty much practice whatever private religion you want, but your city had better have a shrine to Caesar. And, again, reading Dynasty, Julius Caesar, you know, his family lines aren't really that great in terms of, you know, Roman dynasties. And so, you know, you add these stories of the Phoenicians and you know, the stuff that Virgil would pull into, you know, would very much pull out in the Aeneid. And so you have this whole backstory. And again, what you use is this narrative to establish your credentials. And you see that throughout the Roman period. And it's this narrative. And by way of the religion of the empire, you too can participate in this narrative. This is what religion is doing all throughout it. But these empires are by no means Enlightenment empires. It's not about the consent of the governed. You are conquered, and when you are conquered, it is demonstrated that you are an insufficient people. You are an inferior people. You are a second-class people, and the conquest of the nations that have taken you over, their supremacy, the approval of the gods is demonstrated by their conquest over you. That is the way the classical world worked. And that is why the Hebrew prophets, when you get to Ezekiel, they're so exceptional, because you can just see in the book of Ezekiel, they're working through all of these issues about, well, what does it mean to that our nation, that the temple of the Lord was first, well, it was corrupted by us first, and then the Lord had it destroyed. And you notice how this is all processed in narrative. Again, go back to Jordan Peterson's biblical series, because narrative is the machine code, the images and the stories by which we process all of this stuff. And you see all of that stuff going on in the Hebrew scriptures. And empires are not about, you know, equal persons making contracts with each other. Empires are about demonstrating the Darwinian hierarchies of those who are closest to the gods and those who have inferior gods and simply were born to serve. There's no such egalitarianism in the ancient work. But lest we talk too badly about empires, we should notice that, well, empires have actually been tremendously successful. In our time, imperialist ranks second only to fascist. Now, this is going to be important for later on in the video. In the lexicon of political swear words, the contemporary critique of empires commonly takes two forms. Empires do not work in the long run. It is not. This is the critique. Empires do not work in the long run, we say. It is not possible to rule effectively over a large number of conquered peoples. Now, there's a reason we tell this in America, because what the United States has managed to do in the 20th century is establish a different kind of empire, not dissimilar to, let's say, what the... Oh, my wife forgot her phone charger. Hang on, she's going camping this weekend. Okay, so the second rule is, even if it can be done, it should not be done. Morality? Why shouldn't it be done? The Assyrians bragged about their prowess in war. As we'll hear later, the triumphs of the Romans dragged slaves through the empire, parading the plunder that they took. Romans didn't pay taxes. Roman armies went out and plundered the world to pay for Rome. Where's this should come from? Even if it can be done, it should not be done, because empires are evil engines of destruction and exploitation. Well, somebody might have been reading Daniel 7 and the dreams Daniel is having, and these empires that consume the world and grind it with iron teeth. This comes right out of Daniel 7, that dreaded, scary Old Testament. Every people have a right to self-determination. Well, where'd this idea come from? And should never be subject to the rule of another. It's not a very imperial idea. From a historic perspective, the first statement is plain nonsense, and the second is deeply problematic. Are we getting beyond our Christian roots now, Yuval Harari? The truth is that empire has been the world's most common form of political organization for 2,500 years. Most humans during these 2.5 millennia have lived in empires. Empire is also a very stable form of government. Iraq was very stable under Saddam Hussein. Not really an empire, though, but kind of a small one. Most empires have found it alarmingly easy to put down rebellions. In general, they have been toppled only by external invasion or by a split within the ruling elite. Conversely, conquered peoples don't have a very good track record of freeing themselves from their imperial overlords. Most have remained subjugated for hundreds of years. Typically, they have been slowly digested by the conquering empire until their distinct cultures fizzled out. Empires eat cultures. Empires are genocidal. Do you have a moral problem with that? Now, well, before we get to... We'll keep going with these two now.
In the Declaration of Independence, that was made crystal clear that to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, governments are formed with the consent of the governed to allow people to flourish, to prosper. Nothing in the Declaration said anything about being European, being white, being Protestant, being Christian. It was really a social contract set up from first principles, which, of course, they had some pretty big problems with, of course, the African citizens. It took quite a while to work that out. And there were tensions in the...
And all men are created equal. There's a fair amount packed into what, who actually was an actor on that stage.
20th century with waves of immigration from Ireland, from Eastern Europe.
And they were also revolting against the Empire of England. And so there's a fair amount going on in there, and yes, it's contractual, but where do they get these ideas that not only do people groups, which are in some ways principalities, have identities? Children, Israel. Well, what's their father's name? Their father's name is Israel, renamed from Jacob. But individuals within it. Now we're gone fractal here. We're scaling down. Individuals within it all have their own ideas of self-determination. Think of Arul here and some emergent ideas as get out of jail free card.
From Jews, from Italians, and there were, of course, tensions between the Italians and the Irish. But by the standards of human history, they got worked out pretty well. I think...
And we should remember, too, that we're talking very recent history here. We're talking 19th and 20th centuries. This is all quite new.
Capitalizing on a feature of our psychology, which is that even though we do have an in-group favoritism, we do have tribalism, what counts as a tribe is pretty elastic. It is not by skin color. We form coalitions that cut across skin color, and a successful country is one that capitalizes on that elasticity, form a virtual tribe, which is simply every citizen of the country. And then
Now, wait a minute. So I agree here, but there's an elasticity here. But what exactly is the mechanism for that? Now, sometimes it's contractual, but the contractual mechanisms tend to be fairly short-lived, dependent upon the nature of the moment. The longer-term ones that create the elasticity are, again, I will assert, narrative. that we find ourselves in this common ancestor. And so Julius Caesar tries to promote himself by creating a cult of himself, and then when he dies, his son, who wants to consolidate his power, his adopted son Augustus, who wants to consolidate his power, well, what does he do with his father? My father was a god. Well, what does that make you? The son of a god. And again, if we listen to some Tom Holland, you'll notice that all of this language, this gets built into Christianity. But now, what happens in the Apostle Paul and Christianity is that you don't have to be a Jew. You don't even have to be circumcised, but you can become a son of God. A son of God. You can become a slave, can become a son of God. How? Well, by being incorporated into Christ. And if you read the Apostle Paul, what you see is that everything is in Christ. That is, I would assert, a kind of corporate, it's not nationalism because it's not really a nation in the framework that we have, but it really becomes a corporate structure. You are incorporated into Christ, slave and free, Jew and Gentile, male and female. The book of Galatians. You're incorporated into Christ. Now, what Pinker is arguing here very much comes from the Apostle Paul, not Julius Caesar, not the Greeks, the Apostle Paul.
Ultimately, every citizen in larger units, including the humanity, including all the world. A lot of this depends, though, on undermining certain features of human nature, such as kin solidarity. And
who undermined kin solidarity? Who said in the Gospels, in a very dramatic way, unless you hate your brother or sister, you can have no part of me? Did Jesus undermine kin solidarity? Did Paul pick up on this?
It's been noted that in cultures that have a lot of cousin marriage, where you're related to people in your clan, it's rather hard to do nation building there, like in Iraq.
So maybe if they listened to Jesus, they could understand Paul. You see, part of the problem with Pinker and many like him, they don't know their Bible enough, and so they don't know where this stuff comes from.
Mm-hmm. People don't have a sense of superordinate loyalty to a coalition above their blood relatives, and they are tightly tied to blood relatives by cousin marriage. But this also played itself out in the history of the United States. I mean, there's a wonderful snatch of dialogue at the end of the first Godfather movie, when Michael Corleone enlists after Pearl Harbor, and his brother Sonny says, "What, did you go to college to get stupid? Your country ate your blood. You're going to die. You're going to be a sap who dies for strangers." And that is a.
You're going to be a sap who dies for strangers. Is there a story like that? Is there a figure, a principle, a head of something who is a sap who dies for strangers? No, there's no Christianity here. There's no Christianity here. This is all Christianity. And why would you not? Pinker basically says it right here.
Perfect encapsulation of the difference between traditional tribalism and the mentality that we need for a successful.
Right. Well,
let's hear that again.
So
encapsulation of the differences. Your country ate your blood. You're going to die. You're going to be a sap who dies for strangers, and that is a perfect encapsulation of the difference between traditional tribalism and the mentality that we need for a successful.
The mentality that we need for successful. It's who be like that sap who dies for strangers. That's exactly the mentality that we need for success. Where have I heard this before? Who was the world's most famous sap who died for strangers? While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Who said that? Who said that? It was the Apostle Paul that said that.
Right. Well, so it sounds like it sounds like one of the ways to combat right-wing identitarianism, that the new emergence of right-wing identitarianism is to make that conceptual distinction between national identity that's predicated on blood and soil, let's say kinship, direct kinship, or even secondary kinship, and these more abstract conceptions. Now, it seems to me, so just you may know this or you may not, but Ben Shapiro's new book is #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And I read Ben's book a while back, and I think it shares some features with your book, and it shares some features with my book. And I would say the features it shares with my book is that I stress the importance of the Judeo-Christian stories as part of that conceptual substructure that unites a civilization. And then it has features in common with your book because it's also a pro-Enlightenment manifesto celebrating the achievements, let's say, of the Greeks and the rationalists moving forward from there. Like Shapiro sees our culture as, and this is something that I agree with, I would say, as a marriage between that Judeo-Christian tradition and that emergent Enlightenment.
What's funny is that even Peterson and Shapiro almost seem to be putting distance between Judeo-Christian, as they like to say, and the Enlightenment, when it's completely embedded within Christianity. It's not like the Enlightenment happened at some fringe of the fragmenting Christendom. The Enlightenment was in some ways an attempt to shore up the fragmentation that had happened as a result of the Protestant Reformation. In some ways, the Enlightenment was an attempt to create a new Christendom without Christ. That's what the Enlightenment is. Now, we're going to get into that quite a bit more deeply, but what's interesting is, well, we'll see what Pinker wants to do with this.
And stop me if I'm wrong, but
No, you're right. It's the other guy who's wrong.
Emphasis. So let's say that we're playing this abstract conceptual game that unites us as a people, independent of our ethnicity and our race.
And it's a narrative game.
And there are principles that constitute the game rules for that agreement. And you see those as primarily deriving from the Enlightenment and starting then.
Well, there's nothing new under the sun, and certainly some Enlightenment ideas had precursors in the Renaissance and in ancient Greece. But that set of ideas that came together then, and it needed, of course, further elaboration. I think that's much more of a basis of human progress than the Judeo-Christian tradition.
So it's different from the Judeo-Christian. See, this is where it really falls apart, because how on earth you very much see how you should see the Enlightenment is an attempt at reforming the Judeo-Christian ideas, not departing, but trying to replace, trying to establish new institutions of unity after the fragmentation of the church, this church state bond, because you didn't really have states. So after the Protestant Reformation, that's what the Enlightenment is doing. And again, in my earlier videos, I ran through this repeatedly. So part of what you have in the time of the Reformation and the Renaissance is this turn to texts. So if you were a Renaissance scholar and you wanted to study physics, you studied Aristotle. And if you wanted to know, you studied the Bible. So you have Erasmus and Luther, and it's all this turn towards the text. And of course, Luther believes that. Now, I've talked before also about this change. This Christianity becomes very psychological. We have a further evolutionary move on the Barfieldian scale with Luther, but what's happening is Luther believes that the text plus reason will yield unanimity, and out of that the church will flow. But Luther is disappointed and discouraged because even Karlstadt, who's right there with him, even he and Karlstadt can't agree. And so what we have from Luther is this fragmentation, and this fragmentation happens basically because the German princes will no longer enforce the totalitarian theological regime that the church had maintained unity in Europe under. Luther is not killed like John Huss. And that is, again, read Fatal Discord, a terrific book about Luther and Erasmus, which lays out so much of this history. And I've talked about it in previous podcasts. So the German princes no longer are willing to enforce the edicts of the church. And all kinds of things are coming up. Mercantile class, the printing press. And Luther is this rock star in terms of who people want to read, and he begins to outshine even Erasmus, who is a loyal son of the church, but Erasmus, who is a Renaissance father. This whole movement, so this keeps developing, and by the time we get to the Enlightenment fathers, they're saying Luther's attempt at unifying Europe with reason and scripture doesn't work, so let's get rid of scripture, let's keep reason, and let's add empiricism and reason together. So instead of having Catholic and Protestant feuding, we're now adding to it empiricist versus rationalist feuding. And that's what happens in the story of Europe. And the Enlightenment are trying to, just as Luther was trying to see if we can have a unified foundation upon which we can build a civilization. And now they didn't get rid of scripture, but as you can notice, there's a constant migration of what scripture is for that continues to move through that. But it's not a departure from Christianity. It's really an attempt at continuing a progression within Christianity. So to try and keep this as some sort of clean room without Christianity isn't going to work. Now, don't forget what I just read about empire, how unity throughout the world had basically always been maintained, usually through brute force. And that was crucifixion. This is how you maintained unity in this world, through empire. Now, they're looking for, in the Enlightenment, new ways to do this because Europe is fragmented and bloody.
Again, every intellectual movement draws from pre-existing ideas and movements. And so there was some cherry picking from the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Cherry picking. Now, let's see how far we are with this. Okay, we'll keep going.
But it certainly did not depend on belief in Jesus Christ our Savior. It did not depend on a one God as opposed to many gods. It really depended on human well-being, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's something you can believe in regardless of your theological commitments. Okay,
here we go. So yes, and let's give Pinker his due and understand that a secularism begins to go out, and we're going to, in a sense, demote Christian, what we identify as religious practice, and say, well, that isn't it. What? Now notice life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These things are self-evident. Well, let's have him talk a little bit more, and let's think about this self-evident thing a little bit more.
So what do you think? So here's the question I have about that, is that, like, it seemed to me, so that the people who formulated the Declaration of Independence, for example, accepted as self-evident that human beings were intrinsically valuable and the locus of sovereignty, insofar as they were the citizens who would determine the course of the nation. And there's some recognition there, as far as I'm concerned, of intrinsic value outside of a rational argument. It as an a priori presupposition. We accept these truths as self-evident, right? And And the most fundamental truth of that is that it's something like, in my view, it's something like the strange metaphysical equivalence of man before God, the fact that we all have intrinsic value. And that's where I see the Enlightenment being irreducibly embedded inside this underlying structure. And that's different.
Underlying narrative structure. And again, if you go back to, Jordan Peterson's biblical series, you can see, well, what do you mean embedded? What do you mean embedded in an underlying structure? And what form does that take? It takes a narrative form. Because that's our machine code. That's how we process this stuff.
Then the idea of progress, which is something that you're focusing on, and that I think is more attributable to the development, let's say, of science and technology.
Now when we get into Tom Holland, we're gonna get into this too, because progress, Tom Holland is gonna argue, for an Islamic state, their law is given. It's dictated to by God. For the Mosaic Code, it's dictated to by God. Christianity, as Northrop Frye notes, and again, Peterson is a real student of Northrop Frye, Christianity is a religion that is worked out in translation.
But it still seems to me that the Enlightenment had to have an understructure that enabled it to emerge for those self-evident truths to be accepted universally as self-evident.
Right there.
And it still seems the development, let's say, of science and technology, but it still seems to me that the Enlightenment had to have an understructure that enabled it to emerge for those self-evident truths to be accepted universally as self-evident. And
well, except I agree that those aren't scientific ideas. These are the set of ideas that I draw together under the rubric of humanism. It's not clear that
humanism. Well, where does this come from? Does humanism come from the Greeks? Does humanism come from the Romans?
That the self-evident right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is particularly Judeo-Christian. In fact, I don't think you could find that in Scripture. And in fact,
you don't think you can find that in the Scripture? Actually, the first video that I made of this, I had a lot of Bible in it. I just basically went through the Bible, and what you see again and again is this movement towards treating this exactly what he said earlier in the video needed to happen, this decoupling of people from bloodlines into this multi-ethnic, diverse group that now has been brought into a new family via the blood of Christ. That is the story of the New Testament. He says he can't find it in Scripture. Maybe he needs to open Scripture and read it. Maybe he, like the Ethiopian eunuch, I'll come into your chariot, Stephen, and we'll walk through it, because it's all there. And in fact, you don't need me to demonstrate it to you from Scripture. You can have a historian tell you about it. So, well, one of the points I want to make about this, though, is, first of all, this whole business about self-evident. What is self-evident? Now, Peterson just nails this right here, because self-evident means I just see it. Well, here's the difficulty. Why didn't we just see it until a few hundred years ago, or even a couple hundred years ago, or in some cases 50 or 75 years ago? To me, that is not self-evident. That is the product of a very long historical process that leads us to see things in a new light. These ideas of, well, let me tell you about self-evident as being, let's see, what do I have next year? Okay, let me tell you about self-evident. Well, you know what? It was very self-evident to have slaves. And this goes all the way up to and including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Why is it self-evident to have slaves? Well, in the Roman Empire, you have slaves because slaves make your life go better. And you can even find in the New Testament, Jesus understood slaves. He tells us one parable when, if your slave has been working in the field all day and comes into the house after he's tired and working in the field all day, and the master says, make me some dinner. The slave doesn't say, I've been working in that field all day and you've been sitting inside the house all day and now you're going to have me make you make dinner. There's nothing fair about that. Well, you know what? Self-evident, if you're the master, is beat the slave and get him in the kitchen to make dinner. That's what being a slave was. There's nothing not self-evident about slavery. Well, we just see slavery as wrong, but they didn't see it as wrong. We can't figure that out. We can't figure out that. I hear atheists make this argument all the time, a sociology of knowledge argument. Well, if you were born in Iraq, then you would be Muslim. Yeah. Well, if you were born in the 18th century, you wouldn't have a problem with slavery. Who had a problem with slavery in the 18th century? Mostly really, really religious people. Well, why would that be? That's because they're reading the Bible all the time. Well, what are they picking up out of that Bible? Isn't there slavery in the Bible? Yeah, there is. But there's also some undertones and some undercurrents going on. And you might read that little book in the New Testament called Philemon, where the Apostle Paul, where a runaway slave runs into the Apostle Paul. And if you read Roman law about runaway slaves, well, the Roman law was pretty serious about runaway slaves. And the Apostle Paul says to Onesimus, you know what? Your slave Philemon, he's with me. I've got to make sure I got those two guys straight. And he's a Christian. So now you might be his master, but he's your brother. And you're going to have to think about what that means. I could order you, Paul says, but I won't. Because that's not how we Christians relate to one another. But I want you to treat him as a brother. Because he's your brother and he's my brother. Well, what about undoing this blood stuff that you can't find in the Bible? It's all throughout the New Testament. That, in fact, in many ways, it's one of the dominant themes of the New Testament. This dealing with blood, the overcoming of the Jew-Gentile thing. It's in the book of Acts. It's in Paul's letters over and over and over again. But Steven Pinker can't find it. He can't find it because he doesn't know how to read the New Testament. But it's all over the place. Now, self-evident, it's abundantly self-evident to the Greeks and the Romans that all men are not created equal, because some are beautiful and some are not, and some women are beautiful and some are not, and some people are born to power and some are not. And it took hundreds and hundreds of years to get these ideas of biological status and hierarchy. And they're very scientific, because you know what? I bet you LeBron James' kids are going to be great at basketball. I don't know how I might know this, but Kobe Bryant, well, his father played in the NBA. How many people in the NFL had fathers who played in the NFL? This is biology, boys and girls. Where do we get those ideas? They're not scientific that all of us should be treated equally. That comes from the storyverse. That comes from the narrative. It doesn't come from science. It doesn't come from genetics. It comes from someplace else. Now, cherry picking? No, don't start with me cherry picking. How do you know what a cherry is and how to distinguish it from other berries that might taste sweet in the moment, but perhaps will cause you trouble a few hundred years down the line? Tobacco? Sugar? Even the agricultural revolution? Now, my answer to Steven Pinker is Tom Holland, because Tom Holland is writing this book, Dominion, and interviews are coming out, and this book will be coming out at the end of the month in the United States, just 5 more days. I'm going to buy it on the first day. Kindle, bang, it's going to be there and Audible. I'm going to read that sucker. I'm probably going to buy it twice. I'm going to buy it in print and Kindle, probably. But the morality that Steven Pinker brings to his critique of Christianity is the Christian standard. And you see this again and again. Pinkerton wants to say, this is the kind of thinking we need. Well, where did that thinking come from? It comes from the New Testament. That's where it comes from. Now Tom Holland, didn't set out to do this. He tells his story here. He wrote a book about Islam, and some Islamic critic says, hey, you're digging around in the roots of our story. Dig into your own story. Now, in one of the other videos, Tom Holland, as a 6-year-old, went to Sunday school, and someone gave him a Bible, and there's Adam and Eve and a dinosaur. And being a smart 6-year-old, he said, dinosaurs didn't live with people. What's with this Sunday school teacher? And the Sunday school teacher, didn't know how to answer. And Tom Holland figured out right away, I'm smarter than my Sunday school teacher. All this whole church thing, this must be there's nothing here for me. And he went on to live his secular life until he wrote a book on Islam, spent a little bit of time in Iraq studying the persecution of a people by the Islamic State. And he starts having some experiences, and that sends him back to the library. And he starts, he's an expert in classical history. What does he find?
Well, what I would say is that by and large, when Christianity is put in the dock and condemned for being patriarchal or hegemonic or oppressive or Spanish Inquisition or Crusades or whatever. I mean, right. I'm sure you will be familiar with the brickbats that get thrown at it. That the standards by which the church is being judged and found wanting are themselves deeply Christian. Yes. And this, of course, is most famously pointed out by Nietzsche, who is a very significant presence in this book. Yes. Because actually, I read an enormous amount of Christian literature for this book, but almost nothing I read made me feel more deeply Christian than Nietzsche, because Nietzsche actually hates Christianity for the reasons that, by and large, even a Dawkins is willing to admire it. I mean, namely, its valorization of the weak and the poor, and that's what Nietzsche hates. And it, looking at it through that prism, then Nietzsche was a brilliant classicist, enables you to kind of switch gears and re-inhabit a world in which Christianity does not exist, and in which the image of the cross as an emblem of redemption does not exist. Instead, the cross remains what it was to the Romans, an implement of torture.
Yes, that is quite a binary way of looking at it, and that would be kind of my instinct to read Nietzsche in that way. We don't want to follow Nietzsche, therefore it's either the abyss or it's Christ and him crucified. But what if someone would say to you, okay, we don't go with Nietzsche, but there's a third option, isn't there? We don't need to go for the pale Galilean either.
Well, that is the course that by and large the West has taken. I mean, it has taken the course of saying, we'll take over Christian morals and ethics, thank you very much, but we're not actually going to bother with any of the mumbo jumbo that requires us to go to church.
That, in many ways, was the move that happens in the Enlightenment. And those of us who have stopped going to church, that's the path we've taken.
The question that is posed by that, of course, is whether you can continue to have the bloom if the roots have been pulled up, and we don't know the answer to that as a society.
Yeah.
But we are. I mean, I think the secular West is very much a via media. It is a third way.
But reading Nietzsche and thinking to yourself, I don't want to go there, did make the way of the cross more attractive to you? Because that does seem like quite a binary to me. That does, it's...
Well, it's not Nietzsche that brought that home to me. It's thinking about Rome, really. I mean, it's as a child, I idolized Julius Caesar. And one of the reasons I idolized him was that he was not only a great man in almost every way it's possible to be great, but he was renowned for his clementia, his qualities of mercy and compassion. And yet when you write about him and you're that much older, and you realise that Caesar's renown depends on his feats of conquest in Gaul, where it's said by Plutarch, probably with some exaggeration but not a huge amount, that he killed 1 million people and he enslaved another 1 million people. And when he celebrates his triumph, chains of these slaves are being dragged through the streets, and placards are carried boasting how many people he's killed. And you realise this...
Now, pay attention. I was again listening to Hardcore History, and he made the note that even the Nazis and the Japanese in the Second World War went to some pains to hide their atrocities. And so what happens? Hardcore History in his element on the First World War noted that part of what lost the Germans the First World War was the rape of Belgium. And if they had gone into Belgium and sort of tried to mollify the Belgians, and yeah, we're going to blow up your forts and we're going to come through, but we're going to treat you okay. It was the rape of Belgium that got Britain into the First World War in a big way. And the Germans tried to hide the atrocities of killing the Jews and the Slavs and the others, and the Japanese sort of tried to hide these things. That's very unlike the Assyrians. Now, when we get a little bit deeper into the Nazis in the next clips that I'm going to show with more Tom Holland, you're going to note that there's something very important going on in the Nazis, and I just picked up Timothy Snyder's book on Nazism because I read his book Bloodlands, which is a tough book to get through, just because it's so brutal what the people of Ukraine and Belarus and Poland suffered in the 30s and 40s. But there's stuff going on here that we have to pay attention to. So back to Holland, and again, thanks to Glenn Scrivener. Glenn and I have done a couple of conversations, and this. Good job on this, Glenn. This video doesn't have enough views, so I'm just going to play a little part of it. But by all means, watch the whole thing.
This is a profoundly alien world. And the fact that it's founded on the systematic assumption that those who are inferior must be downtrodden, and it's right and proper to downtread them, for which the cross is the ultimate emblem, because the cross is designed not just to torture, but to humiliate. And through the process of torture and humiliation, to advertise Rome's power, and therefore to insinuate into the guts of those who are subject to Rome this kind of gnawing worm of dread. And while I was writing this, I went to Iraq and made a film about the Islamic State, and specifically what they were doing to the Yazidis. And we went to a town where lots of Yazidis had lived. The women had been rounded up and enslaved, and those who were not attractive enough to be enslaved had been shot. And this happened on a kind of open field between Sinjar, the town that had just been liberated, and the Islamic State, whose positions were about a mile or so further beyond the town. And the men had been killed, and many of them had been crucified in this town. So I was wandering around a town that had exactly the kind of fate that the Romans had visited on towns when they conquered, and where people had been crucified. And these people who'd done the crucifixion were a mile away within striking distance, and I can tell you that I felt that dread in my guts.
Right.
And it opened a kind of abyss to me, and the abyss was contemplating a world where the cross had not come to take on the significance that it has in the present world, even for those who are not Christian. But you could be an atheist, you could be whatever, but you look at, say, the Red Cross, and it doesn't say torture, it doesn't say dread, it doesn't say terror, it doesn't say imperial power. It says nice people doing nice things for people. So even in that kind of attenuated level, the cross has become a symbol of hope. But to imagine a world where, ruled by people for whom it did not have that significance, to imagine a world in which the cross existed to torture and intimidate its enemies, I did experience it as a kind of blasphemy. And I'm sure that as a kind of religious faith, because it was a response that came from deep within me.
Yes.
Now, again, watch the whole video. The morality Steven Pinker brings to his critique of Christianity is the Christian standard, but Pinker either doesn't know it or doesn't want to admit it or is in denial of it. Jesus' morality without the pale Galilean. This is this via media that Tom Holland is talking about. Now, I want to pause this, and I want to play more of Tom Holland in another podcast. This is a podcast interview that he did. I didn't know anything about this podcaster. Seems to be a conservative British podcaster, Dellingport. But this is an hour-long podcast, and I'm going to play a substantial portion of it. But by all means, watch the whole podcast, because I'm just touching on some of the themes. This podcast was... At the end of it, Dellingport tries to whatever his name is, tries to say to Tom Holland, isn't this the best interview you're doing for your book? And, not to take anything away from Glenn's interview, but this interview is outstanding, just in terms of just so much of it. So if you're going to watch, I told somebody on Twitter, I said, I haven't been this excited about one particular video since I started watching Jordan Peterson's biblical series. This video is full of a number of things. And so over the next little while, don't be surprised to see me pull up clips of it as we go. So I'm just going to play for you a sort of edited version of it where I focus on some of the items that relate to this video, but there's so much other gold in this conversation. By all means, watch it.
Well, I think that the argument of the book is that Christianity has so saturated everything that everybody in the West does that essentially it's the water inside the goldfish bowl in which we as goldfish are all swimming. However, that said, I do think that abruptly and within our lifetimes, there has been a kind of precipitous drop in the number of people, as you say, who are familiar with the most basic biblical stories. And so it may be that we are now genuinely looking at the fading of that. But even so, even were no one to know anything about the Bible or the history of Christianity or anything, the West would remain fundamentally shaped by that Christian inheritance. It would make no difference at all.
That's an astounding... Oops, where have I gone? I've... Uh-oh. Oh, here I am. Okay. We'll see if Windows plays well with this. That's an astounding statement he just made, that it wouldn't...
But one of the history of biblical stories, and so it may be that we are now genuinely looking at the fading of that. But even so, even were no one to know anything about the Bible or the history of Christianity or anything, the West would remain fundamentally shaped by that Christian inheritance. It would make no difference at all.
Okay, it's interesting because in the other conversation he said, well, if you lose, can you still have the bloom, which is this moral framework, if you lose the root? And I think what he's saying in this statement is that this has now been so deeply embedded into us that, as you can see in Steven Pinker, as you can see in Stephen Woodford, the Rationality Rules guy, as you can see, no, I'm not obsessed with him. As you can see in Matt Dillahunty, as you can see in Sam Harris, as you can see in all of these celebrity atheists, they all simply assume the fruit of Christian morality that was not present in the ancient world at all. And in fact, it just simply isn't there. Now, we can get into C.S. Lewis's Tao and that, well, there's certainly some commonality in terms of this moral intuition, but the framework by which we critique. There's another interesting video of from 4 years ago of Tom Holland debating with a woman in the UK about Islam, and the woman just keeps making the points about Islam. And I go back to that Rene Girard episode that I've played a couple of times, and maybe I'll pull up that video and pull up the Rene Girard video, because she makes Rene Girard's point, because here are the Westerners treating Islamic peoples like Christians would treat them, and of course the Islamic peoples, they don't have those rules. And Holland's going to say way more interesting stuff as we go through here.
But one of the key figures in this kind of panoramic history is Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, the great German philosopher, who in many ways is the most scabrous critic of Christianity, and he's honest in his criticism in a way that lots of atheists today aren't, celebrity atheists aren't, because they may say, I don't believe in the Christian God, but it's manifest in almost everything that they say and do, that they do believe in the kind of baggage of Christian morality and ethics that comes from that. Nietzsche hated Christian ethics, he hated Christian morals, and he loathed Christianity basically for having suppressed the sense of pagan virtue that you've just been eulogizing, the sense of getting ready for war, of fighting before the walls of Troy, that kind of glamorous savagery and cruelty that is manifest in so much, not just Greek myth, but pretty much all.
And in your brother's books.
No, well.
His brother writes history more in the World War II era. Tom Holland's brother.
Come to that in a minute. Yeah. But basically all the kind of the mythology and the epic of the ancient world. And Nietzsche says, well, what happens with Jesus is that Christianity serves to make the victim the hero. It serves to make those who are low. It serves to make not the guy who puts the nails into the cross, but the guy who's having the nails driven through his flesh and bone, being pinned to the cross. He's the guy who becomes the centre of attention. And what Nietzsche says is that the seismic understanding of Christianity is that weakness is a form of strength, because it can shame and humble and humiliate the strong and the powerful. And Nietzsche was pledged to the idea that this was wrong, and that Christianity was a kind of sickness.
Now this capacity of Christianity to do this, again, think about what that is. That is a change in, again, well, we might say the zeitgeist, and all of this stuff that Jordan Peterson talks about in terms of how we see things acted out and story and how we play it out in drama, all the stuff that he goes through again and again and again in that first episode of the biblical series, that's all built into this. And so what you see in Jesus is the beginning of this tremendous reversal. And this takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to get built into us, as through story and narrative and our imaginary and all of this stuff. It takes a long time to work through into us, but this all starts with Jesus.
And that the obsession with the weak, with the poor, had to be overthrown, and we had to get back to revalorizing strength and potency and indeed cruelty. And the odd thing is that in the process of writing this book and researching it, so I read an enormous amount, and I read a lot of Christian apologetics, people writing in defense of Christianity, arguing in favor of it. But there was almost no one I read that made me personally feel more Christian than Nietzsche, because the depth of his contempt and hatred for everything that I actually most value in Christianity is incredibly powerful, and it kind of opens your eyes to what a world might be where people don't actually don't hold to the values that Christianity has enshrined in our civilization. And it's perfectly possible to imagine what that world might look like, because essentially it would look quite like the Greek world, the Roman world, the world that existed before Christianity. And were that world to be fused with science, and particularly with a kind of eugenicist understanding of Darwinism, then we get something quite like Nazism.
Right.
Something quite like fascism. And fascism essentially is an attempt both to go back to a pre-Christian period. So that's why Mussolini initially is so fascinated with the figure of Augustus, the emperor who rules before Jesus is born. And then Hitler, of course, as well, fascinated with the Spartans, with the Romans, with the blonde beasts, in Nietzsche's words, who'd inhabited the German forests. But of course is also very keen to look forward to the future. It's a very futurist project, fascism and Nazism in particular, and is invoking trends in science and technology that Hitler sees as being beyond the Christian era. And it becomes the stated aim of Hitler to destroy Christianity utterly within a kind of 40-year program. And anything that is left of the Christian faith has to be subordinated and turned to what Hitler casts as simultaneously the ancient and the modern program that he represents. And so Nazism is an attempt consciously to repudiate everything within European civilization that derives from Christianity, and essentially that's pretty much everything.
Right. And I suppose life under the Islamic State would be another example of the kind of...
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's complicated. On the one hand, while I was writing this book, I made a film.
Very bravely.
Oh, James.
So you were. I was impressed.
It was the
They're so British.
closest to homicidal maniacs that I've ever come to in my life.
Oh, James.
And it involved going to Sinjar, which was a city that the Islamic State had captured, where the Yazidis, a religious minority, lived. And Islamic State regarded them as pagans and enslaved a lot of the women, killed a lot of the ones that they didn't find attractive enough to enslave, and crucified a lot of the men. So I was in the rubble of this town, which had just been liberated a few weeks before, and the Islamic State were a mile or so beyond flat terrain, so kind of within striking distance. And being in this town and knowing that people had been crucified there and suffered that death, and that the people who had done that were within striking distance, and to know that they were crucifying people in exactly the way that the Romans had crucified people. The aim was to intimidate, to terrify, to set up a sense of dread deep within the stomach, so that you, as someone who has no way of fighting back against them, is utterly intimidated by them, utterly prostrated before them.
Now, remember what I read from Yuval Harari about empire? That is how empire functioned. When the Assyrians would conquer a city, you'd go to the next city and say, that other city that was stronger than you, had a better army than you, here's the head of their king. Now we'll make you a deal. You can open the gates and let us have our way, and maybe we'll go easy on you, or you can try and fight us, and we're going to kill and enslave you all and burn everything down and leave nothing left behind. What sounds like the mob. Yeah, that's how human beings are. That's how we are. And, well, what do American soldiers do when they go into Iraq? Well, they blew up your house. How are they going to pay for it? And all of this stuff happens because something has changed in the imaginary underneath, and we don't even know it. And Pinker doesn't know it, and Harris doesn't know it. None of the celebrity atheists seem to know this. They all just assume, well, that's what morality is. It's self-evident. Yeah, it's self-evident to thee. We hold these things to be self-evident. Doesn't mean the ancient Egyptians did, or the Assyrians, or the Romans, or the Greeks, or anybody else. And so the Nazis are kind of like, we're going to overthrow this because, well, why? Why would you want to overthrow this? Because we're strong. We're the superior race. We're going to take this out. Oh, really? And the Japanese, they have the same feelings. I mean, we all feel that we're the superior, we're on top, But why the care for the weak? Care for the weak is so costly. Care for the weak is so sacrificial. It makes no sense. But somehow, in us, we feel, that's, okay, y'all. We've been programmed this way. Well, who changed our programming? It's the Sunday school answer. Jesus.
And it was the first time that I had to contemplate the reality of crucifixion, but also the reality of a world in which the concept of crucifixion is unmediated by the role that it plays in Christian civilization. Because the cross is probably the single most culturally recognizable symbol that humanity has ever devised. And so whenever you see it, you are inclined to think of the figure of Jesus. And you may not be a Christian. You may not believe a word of it. You may be antithetical to Christianity. And yet, what the cross symbolizes is the triumph of the weak over imperial power. It's the triumph of... It's about finding victory in the heart of defeat. And it's an incredibly powerful myth. It's it's the most symbolically potent myth that humanity has ever devised. And to contemplate crucifixion as something that does not have that, I found utterly terrifying. And it made me realize that I take that so for granted, that actually to confront a world where that no longer exists I found a kind of terrifying thing. And it was a strongly influential in the process then of writing this book, that the whole way through, Christianity's influence ultimately is not about whether you believe in God or what this Bible verse says or what the church says you should or shouldn't do. It's about ultimately the kind of the molten core of the faith. If you like, if you think of it as a kind of mighty power station generating waves of power, the molten heart of that station is the myth of the cross and the resurrection. And a world without that, I think, would be really terrifying.
Now, some of you are going to jump on this and say, oh, yeah, I agree with that. That's wonderful, but that doesn't mean I should practice anything. Well, here's the thing. You got the rider and the elephant. And the rider on top says, oh, that molten core power surging out, that sounds so good. I want churches to go, and I want traditional morality, and I want all of this stuff. Yeah, but what happens when someone crosses you? Because this molten core isn't just for, national politics or any of those things. This stuff has to scale down. One of the interesting things that Peterson said in one of his, that really struck me when it was in Maps of Meaning, I think, or Personality, I don't remember which, but he said, I think it was Maps of Meaning, he said, in totalitarian systems, the totalitarian thing has to go all the way down to the bottom. You have to terrorize yourself. And I've seen this happen in religious context as well, that you have to totalitarianize yourself in this. It has to go all the way down. But it's the same thing with this molten core, these waves. It has to come all the way down with me, and it depends about how do I treat my neighbor? How does it change me? Well, it's not going to change me because I listen to Tom Holland say, oh, this changes the world. This is this ethic that we all look at and say, yep, even if churches go away, we're going to keep this ethic. Well, that's a wonderful thing. But the ethic is going to go away because, again, go back to Jordan Peterson's first biblical series. And, we organize this stuff because we see it played out. And we watch it and we learn. And so when this gunman goes in and he shoots up the Amish school children, and the Amish church puts a fund, and he's shot by police, or he's killed himself, I don't remember which. But the Amish who had lost their daughters put together a collection so his children can go to college. What is that? And the nation looks at them and says, oh, we hate fundamentalists. Now, the Amish are fundamentalists by anybody's measure. But why does their fundamentalism lead them to love their enemies and forgive those who hurt them? Hundreds of years of repeating and reinforcing and training those elephants so that you can turn the other cheek, so that you can forgive. And then right away, even when I say those words, we start to get, that's not practical. That doesn't work in this world. Well, now you've got some real dissonance going on, and I don't think I've got it in this particular set of clips, but Holland will talk about that in this interview. And again, watch this whole interview because the whole thing is just outstanding. And again, I can't wait to get my hands on this book because Holland is not, later in this interview, and I'm not going to play it, later in this interview, he talks about, how he grew up. And I talked about that a little bit before during the Scrivener interview. But we say, oh, we love those ideas. That's so beautiful. Yeah, but they're so painful and costly to live. Well, you mean, go back to Pinker. What, you're going to be a sucker and die for strangers? Yeah, that's what builds this morality. And don't you for a minute imagine that if people stop dying for strangers, we'll stop believing in this beautiful morality that we all look at and say, yeah, that's right.
And both Paul, St. Paul, who is the first Christian writer that we have, he recognizes that the cross lines are the heart of the message that he's given. And he recognizes that this is a scandal, a shock, that it's almost impossible to understand, and yet that's what he's preaching. And then Nietzsche, at the kind of the end of the Christian period, likewise, he also said, this is the most shocking idea, the most shocking symbol that humanity's ever come up with. He hates it, but he recognizes the seismic civilizational transformation that it was able to generate, and he hates and fears it because he recognizes its power.
So you spend a lot of your
and how can you not recognize its power? Because I just did that video on Ad Astra and the Joker. There's way more people out there living a Joker reality than the Brad Pitt spaceman superhero reality. You know, are you beautiful? Do you keep your hair? Do you not age? Do you have lots of money? Do all your relationships go well? No, it doesn't happen. I'm a pastor. People come into church and say, how these people have their lives all together. I say, yeah, you're not their pastor. You don't know what their lives are like. You don't know the problems that they have in their marriages. You don't know how much debt they have. You don't know how much they're drinking. You don't know how much they're struggling just to get through life. And these are all the people that seem to be making it. I'm not even talking about the homeless people that sleep against my door. Humanity is a mess. This stuff isn't just, you know, something we do for window dressing. This is the world. And so when Paul says that there's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, and he says you go back to your slave master. You're like you're telling the slave to go back to the slave master, yes, and you're also telling the slave master that slave is your brother. Treat him accordingly. I'm watching you do it. I'm not going to order you, but you were bought. You're someone's slave. Treat him the way you'd like to be treated. Listen to Freddie. This is the gospel. And when we hear this, we get this vision. We say, yes, I would like to imagine that myself, this little nobody who has all these problems, I can be a child of God. I can be a son of God, not just Augustus sitting in Rome who, you know, well, let's all put up temples for Julius Caesar because he's God. And yet, Augustus is going to give you money for that because Augustus is promoting his father's religion because he's a son of God. And along come the Christians and it says to the slave, to the girl that's picked up off the dirt pile, you are a child of God. Well, what do you mean by that? God, the very Son of God, came down, Philippians 2, and became a slave, became a nothing for your sake. You say, that's a beautiful story, Pastor. You just keep telling people, yeah. But the thing is, if I just keep telling people it, it doesn't sink in. We're elephants. We have to be immersed in it, which is exactly why there is a church and why we need community and why all this comes together. And you say, yeah, but when I go to church, I don't feel it. Yeah, you feel it when you go to the gym. What do you feel when you go to the gym? You feel pain. Because if you work this out, if you actually practice what Jesus teaches, you feel pain. What happens when you turn the other cheek? You most of the time get hit twice. And you say, well, how does this work? Well, you're not going to know until my friend Warren, he wants me to write a review of his book. And basically, the heart of his book, How Good is the Golden Rule? You won't know it until you try it. And when you try it, you'll say, well, this doesn't work because I thought this was supposed to bring, rainbows and unicorns and perpetual daisies. No, but what it does is it makes you the kind of being that people stop and say, I don't know if I want to be like him, but I sure want to be like him.
A history writing career in ancient times, in pre-Christian times, were there no but before Christianity came along, were there no tempering forces on human behavior?
And now, again, we're democratic people, and C.S. Lewis writes about this in his book Miracles, in his chapter, The Great Miracle. We're democratic people. We want to believe, and we get this idea from Christianity, too. And that's the thing with Christianity. There's all these ideas that's like, how do we fit these things together? Isn't God equidistant from each of us? Yes. But godliness isn't. Ask and you receive, knock and you will be answered. Well, aren't all religions starting from the same place? Really? You believe that? Isn't Nazism a religion? Well, now what Holland is about to say, if you're secular, should really blow your mind.
Of course. It stopped everyone behaving like.
Absolutely. I mean, Christianity.
So what were they?
Well, Christianity emerges from a kind of melting pot of different cultures. And Eusebius, who is the bishop who writes the life of Constantine in the early 4th century, when he writes about why was Jesus born when he was born, and he says, well, he was born in the reign of Augustus, and Augustus had just united the world. So Rome rules this vast empire, and for the first time, people from the Atlantic to Near East had joined.
And he doesn't rule them by the consent of the governed. Romans pay no taxes. Jews pay taxes for Romans and everyone else. That's how Rome rules. It's not by the consent.
In a single global order. And he says, well, this is proof of God's providence, because if this hadn't happened, then the message of the gospel would not have been able to spread as easily as he did. I mean, and he in a sense, he's right. I mean, you don't have to invoke God's providence, but it's clearly the fact, it's clear that what the Roman world facilitates is the mixing and mingling of different cultural traditions. And those cultural traditions, most obviously, there's the tradition of the Hebrew scriptures, of Jewish civilization, which we shouldn't call Judaism. There is a Greek word Judaismos, which is often translated as Judaism, but that's hugely anachronistic. What it means is Jewishness. So it relates to the possible span of the ways that you can be Jewish.
Now, remember in Pinker's talk when Pinker says, well, the Bible's just about, God's chosen, the Bible's just reinforcing bloodline. But the Christian Bible has two parts, and there's a spectrum, which this Jewishness that Tom Holland is noting, and one side of it is going to emerge through Christianity. And if you think again about what Christianity is doing, you'll be able to figure out which side.
And it's probably best to think of Jewishness as points on a bandwidth. So at one end, there is the idea that this one God is the God of Israel, bound by covenant with one particular people. And at the other, he is the God who has created the heavens and the earth, and therefore every human being on the face of the planet. Which one do you choose to emphasize? And what becomes Christianity emerges out of this by emphasizing the universal God. Right. What will become the kind of Talmudic tradition, the rabbinical tradition, is one that emphasizes God's role as the God of Israel. So that's obviously the key kind of determinant. But you also have other influences as well. You have the influence of Persia, which has kind of refracted through the Jewish traditions. And the key thing about Persian idea is this kind of notion of a dualistic world where the entire universe is to be understood in moral terms, that there are rival principles of darkness and light, of the lie and of truth. Also, there is the idea that that there will be an end of days, that there will be a day of judgment, and all these kind of concepts.
So that encourages you to behave well, or
well, it basically moralizes almost everything you do. So it kind of anything that you do, anything in the world is somehow part of a kind of moral dimension. So that's very important.
People had a moral conscience before Jesus.
Well, so the word conscience is a really interesting one. It's a Greek concept, specifically a Stoic concept, and before Rome there is Greece. So there is Alexander, who conquers the Near East and founds the great city of Alexandria, which is the city where most Jews live, far more than in Jerusalem. So Jews become very, very Hellenized in the way that lots of Jews now are anglicized. Just as there are Jews now who speak English but don't speak Hebrew, so likewise there were lots of Jews who only speak Greek but didn't speak Hebrew. One of the philosophies which is very influential on Christianity is Stoicism, and Stoicism has this idea that basically the divine is manifest within everything, and therefore the whole world is a cosmopolis.
In him we live and move and have our being.
So a great kind of universal city, and therefore there is basically a kind of commonality. Everybody has a kind of shared identity, and the spark of the divine that every human being has, the Stoics call it synodesis, and conscience is effectively the closest translation we have of that. And when Paul comes to write his letters, he's saying that the covenant that existed between the God of Israel and the chosen people, that it's no longer necessary, because now with Christ's death on the cross, a new covenant has been established which binds everybody. And the way that becomes manifest is where you discover the knowledge that Christ has died for you in your heart, and the law of God, rather than being written on the tablets as it had been at Mount Sinai, is now written on your heart. And Paul reaches for this word synodesis, the Stoic word for conscience, and he says conscience is where the law of God is written. And that's a seismically influential moment, because it means that in Christian civilization there is a concept that of God's law, but it's not written down. in the way that it is in Hebrew scripture and the way that it will be in Islamic scripture. Instead, it's written on the heart. And so that means that your concept of what is right and wrong can evolve over time. Moving forward, if you look at the 6th and 7th centuries, you have 3 massive bodies of law that emerges from that. It's a kind of massively legally codifying age. You have the Talmud, Jewish body of law, you have the Sunnah, Islamic body of law, and then you have the great corpus of Roman law. Now, only one of those, I mean, the Talmud and the Sunnah supposedly come directly from God. So its divinity is manifest with.
Now this is where, and you hear me talk about organic inspiration, this is where these questions of nature of inspiration come. So the Jewish code comes, here's the Mosaic law, this is from God. Here's the Islamic word, this is from God. Now, the New Testament version is this is inspired by God, this is from God, but Christians don't worship the Bible. The Bible is not divine. But we Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, not Father, Son, and Holy Scripture. And so what happens in Christianity is you actually get this progressive revelation. Now, that's a really dicey thing to have, and you know, people, we don't like that. And so what it opens up are all of these continual conversations about, is this within the canon? Is this not within the canon? Can you not lose your narrative thread without your religion? This is radioactive stuff in a religion, but this is within Christianity. And so this is why I keep saying that the culture war in the West is a Christian civil war. This is elements of Christianity working through all of these difficult questions. You say, yeah, but it's really troubling. Again, read Alistair McGrath's book, Heresy, because what he asserts in Heresy is that the establishment of orthodoxy is often a result of wrestling with heterodox ideas, and you find which ideas become dead ends. And it's through all of this diversity of ideas and conversation and confusion and struggle, and many oftentimes in the history of the church bloodshed, but out of this emerges truth. So it's Darwinian in a sense, but again, this is according to Christianity, this is all guided by the Holy Spirit, and that's why we have fierce conversations within the church, and we study the text so as not to lose the thread. And what you see is whole communities, they adopt a certain thread and they become a dead end, but on it goes.
In it, the body of Roman law is secular. The emperors who codify them are Christian, but it doesn't matter that the laws that they're codifying come from the pagan Roman past. And that means that in Christian civilization, it's fine for laws that are authored by humans to offer a kind of idea that this is an ultimate legal recourse that you do not get in Jewish and Islamic.
Right there, and he's going to go into this quite a bit more deeply, right there you see the beginning of the relationship with the secular. Well, how can the words of man be the word of God? Well, this is what you're working through.
Islamic civilization. So that's a kind of fundamental aspect that derives from Christianity. And this idea of conscience, this idea that God speaks to you, lets you know what is true, that the light of his truth irradiates you and hopefully the world beyond. That also is a massively potent idea, because it feeds into the idea that human society can be progressive, that you can get to know things better, that the more the light of conscience shines.
And people keep debating, well, why did the Enlightenment, why did the scientific revolution, why all of this dramatic improvement within Christendom? Well, you can begin to see that the foundation was laid very early on for all of this to happen. No, the Enlightenment has nothing to do with Christianity. The Enlightenment is built on Christianity.
So the better you can become, so the better your laws can become, so the better your society can become. And in Latin Christendom, in the West, by the 11th century, this idea has been fused with the idea that the whole of society can be lit by the light of God, that it can be born again, that it can be kind of baptized in the water of the Spirit. And that then imports the idea that everything in society can be improved, because essentially up until that point, most people had an understanding of society with which I'm personally hugely sympathetic, that all change is bad.
Yeah.
That you shouldn't change anything.
Yeah.
That things are much better. Just leave it as it is. In the 11th century, that idea is fundamentally, radically, and permanently changed in the West, because the idea that you can make a society better gets embedded in the fabric of what will become this kind of papal order that emerges and will become the civilization, first of medieval Christendom, then with the Reformation, then with the French Revolution, now with the 60s and its aftermath. The same impulses are reverberating out and out and out like the kind of ripples from a mighty earthquake.
Now that doesn't baptize all of the changes that happen, because what you have, in fact, is a structure, a community of communities that work through these things and try them out, and in a very Darwinian way, some drop off. It is over time revealed that these are dead ends, and so it's continuity, it's dynamic. There's progress in it. Now, I'm a-mill, I'm not post-mill, and those of you who know this Christian nomenclature will have an understanding of why I just said that. But all of this is going on, and this is all set up again by Christianity. In the latter days, the Son of Man came and revealed this to us.
So this idea that there is evolution built into Christianity, is that why we've got this situation where the concept of the secular you mentioned, is it why Islam is not capable of doing this, because it hasn't got that inbuilt?
Well,
it's fixed.
Islam and Christianity come from the same matrix. So if you're say you were to a Hindu, for instance, it's often said that to Hindu, Christianity and Islam are merely kind of shoots off the same branch.
Yeah.
And obviously that's true. But in the same way, there are profound and fundamental differences between the civilizations as they've grown up. And one of the difficulties with recognizing that is, again, precisely the degree to which the Christian notion of there being something called a religion has become universal. Wherever European languages are spoken, and often beyond that as well, the concept that there is something called a religion exists, and people tend to assume that this is, you might as well say, there are trees or there are dogs as there are religions. It seems to be as natural as that, but it isn't. The concept of religion, again, is a highly culturally distinctive notion that is bred of the marrow of Christian assumptions, and essentially it relates to what you were talking about the concept of the secular, which again is a wholly contingent, culturally specific idea, which no other civilization has
There's
really...
no concept of the secular in Islam.
No, and there wasn't a concept of the secular in Christianity really until the kind of early Middle Ages, really,
so and Abelard and the people like that.
Yes, around that period. And it goes back to the time of Augustine, who is living when Rome in 410 is sacked, and there are lots of Romans who haven't become Christian who say, well, this is because we've abandoned the old ways, we've abandoned the old gods, so we're being punished. And Augustine says, no, not at all. The divine cannot be manifest in the earthly order. Only the radiant purity of heaven is eternal. Everything human, everything mortal, everything terrestrial is in a state of flux. And he reaches for a Latin word, saeculum, to define that. And saeculum literally means the limit of the span of human memory. So 80 years, 100 years, 120 years, it comes to be identified with 100. So hence, saeculum feeds into, siècle, French word for century, and so on. And so the saeculum, the dimension of the saeculum, the city of man, gets counterpointed to the city of God.
Right.
And if you want to, as a human who is trapped within the saeculum, the flux of things, if you want to get close to God before death, then you need to bind yourself to him. And again, in Latin, that there is a word religio, which in the classical period meant something that binds you to a god. So it could be a priesthood, it could be a festival, it could be a sacrifice. in the Christian period, religio comes to mean those who, religiones are those who particularly bind themselves to God. So monks, nuns, hermits, people like that. And over the course of the early Middle Ages and then into the high Middle Ages, you get this idea that there's the dimension of religio and there's the dimension of the saeculum. And this becomes institutionalized in the 11th century when kind of radicals, and in fact you could almost say heretics, they seize control of the most prestigious bishopric in Christendom, that of Rome. And out of this kind of papal order, they found Europe's first great revolutionary order, which says that the dimension of the church, of the sacred, of the holy, of religio, has to be permanently and fundamentally separated from the dimension of the saeculum. So kings and emperors who until that point had the perfect right to appoint bishops and themselves had all kinds of sacral power, they get kind of shoved to one side. And basically there's a great project to drain the dimension of the saeculum of things that had made it sacred. And the effect of that is to kind of institutionalize this idea that there is a division between the dimension, let's say, of religio and the dimension of the saeculum. And then in the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, everyone has a religio. It's not just monks anymore.
You see this stuff going back and forth.
Everyone has a religio. And so you start to get a new sense of what becomes anglicized to become religion. So religion has two shades of meaning. On the one hand, it's the personal relationship that you as a believer have with the divine. What do you believe? What do you think? What's your relationship to a god? This is what religion means to a Christian in the 17th, 18th century. And then against that, it's something that can be defined against the secular. So it's something that's kind of to one side. So religion is something that is separate from society, the economy, music, culture, whatever.
Yeah.
So you have secular music, you have religious music, and everyone starts to know what that means. And so the idea that religion is something that can be parked on one side, by the time that the British start, for instance, to take over India, this is something that they're absolutely taking for granted. And when they go abroad, they get asked, well, what is the religion, what is the religion of people in the Ottoman Empire? Oh, it's something called Islam. What's the religion of people in Hindustan, where the Hindus live, the Indians live? Oh, well, it must be something called Hinduism.
Now, for a lot of you listening, you're thinking, what's he talking about? And it's all about the thing that this is the water that they're swimming in, that there's no such thing as a religion. There's just the way that you live. And what happens when you have a religion is you pull it apart from yourself. There's some self-transcendence in there. And once you make that move of self-transcendence, well, then you can start looking at it. And then you've got the engagement of the will. And, well, do I like this thing? Well, then we have rationality. Well, does this way work? And so you have the idea of the progressive. And now we have the self-transcendence from the religious. And once you begin to see this machinery all taking place, well, the potential for remaking the world is just radical. And again, all of this comes about because of Christianity. And we're not even up to the Enlightenment, but by the time we get to the Enlightenment, and at first again in the Reformation during the Renaissance, I mean, Martin Luther is sort of he's sort of the transition period from the medieval to the modern, but Luther was still, there's authority in the text, and when that text plus reason didn't seem to afford the uniformity and the peace which Luther had hoped it would have, well now let's look to empiricism. So reason plus empiricism will give us the uniformity, but we're still in that process. And so we hold these truths to be self-evident. Really? Doesn't seem to be self-evident to Sally Hemings. Well, how did she feel about her relationship with Thomas Jefferson? And what about Thomas Jefferson and clipping up his Bible and on and on and on and on and on and on and on? All of the foundations are there, and we do it sort of mindlessly. Who knew we could pull ourselves away from a religion? And so, again, I was talking to one of the members of my meetup, and one of his parents is of Japanese descent, and he just looks at all these Americans and kind of chuckles. He says, they think they're Buddhists. Go to Japan and find some real ones. You can't be Buddhist here. Well, you can if you're in this seculum of Christianity, because, well, there's me in this via media, this secular space, and now I can be a consumer of religions, and I'll choose my religion, and maybe I'll take the menu approach. I'll choose a little bit of Buddhism, I'll choose a little Christianity, and I'll define my own religion. But then you're not really embedded in it. Then you're just placing it on. I mean, this stuff gets endlessly complicated. But again, all of this comes by Christianity. That's where it comes from. And to say, well, I'm not Christian. Well, you can't even say that sentence apart from Christianity.
And so Christians construct this idea of there being world religions. But Christianity is, of course, the prototype. So it's like the legend of Procrustes, the one that the thief, the robber that Theseus kills in the legend, who supposedly takes travelers and makes them sleep in his magical bed, and it always fits them. And the way that he makes the bed always fit his visitors is, if they're too short, he racks them, and if they're too long, he chops bits off.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what...
You gotta love a classicist, because he's got all the, I have the Bible stories at my fingers, but he's got the myths at his fingers, and there's a myth for everything.
Modern Western society, imperialism has done with the belief systems and the structures of belief of other civilizations is that it's imposed this Procrustean model of religion, across the entire world. And so, to that extent, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, these are all concepts that have been Christianized. And there's an Indian scholar who said, I think accurately and brilliantly, that Christianization advances in two ways. It advances through conversion, obviously, so but it also proceeds through secularization. In other words, in convincing societies that there is something called the secular and that there is something called religion that is separate from it. And in that sense, although the Raj did not convert India to Christianity on any mass scale, it did convert it to secularism. And when the Raj ended and the British left...
Now the Raj, it was the British administration of India, okay? I know that's a term that the British might know and Americans might not, but the Raj is the British administration of India when India was its colony.
India was re-established as a secular republic, and to this day it remains a secular republic.
I like that. So,
and think about after World War I, after the defeat of the Ottoman Turks. I mean, Turkey becomes a secular society, and you can see how this is so incredible. How well, we're not going to take your Christianity, but the secular idea just transforms the world. I was listening to a video of a guy who had very much had a Jordan Peterson story, and I don't know, maybe I'll use it on my channel as such, but this guy goes to China to teach English, and he goes there as a Christian missionary and wants to make Christian converts, and then he loses his faith, but he goes to China. He says, it's the most secular country you could imagine. And it's like, well, how did China get secular? Judeo-Christianity. What? Marxism is part of the Judeo-Christian stream, isn't it? And so via Marx, the Christian missionaries didn't succeed in converting people to Christianity, but Marx and communism and Mao converted it to this pseudo-Christian secularity, which is also sort of Christianity coming under the surface, and they don't even know it. We're not Christians, we're secular. You're kind of Christian light, you're kind of Protestant light. It's the whole framework of thinking that has completely, you're hard pressed to find people in the world. You can still find them, but you're hard pressed to find people in the world that haven't been transformed by this. This blew my mind when I heard this, and I thought, wow, it's like lights went on.
So that's part of what Modi is about, because Modi and the kind of what's called Hindu nationalism, essentially, it's a response to this. It's a recognition of the fact that the secular is not, as Western liberals and liberals across the world like to think, something that is just a natural state.
Yeah.
It's not. It's specific to a particular civilization that has exported this idea around the world.
Yeah.
And same with Japan. Japan is is not at all a Christian country. Christianity was brutally and highly effectively wiped out in Japan in the 17th century. But Japan also is now secular.
Right.
Now there was something. Oh yes, environmentalism. So
I chopped this up a little bit because watch the whole video, because I don't know, I know Glenn, and I know he won't have any problem me using his video. I'm using a lot of this video, and I don't know how this guy's going to feel about that. So, watch his video, subscribe to his channel, whatever you got to do to thank him for making this. Go ahead and thank him, because this interview was just blew my mind.
I do think that
now humanism. Because go back and remember, what did Pinker say? None of this Judeo-Christian stuff, humanism. Well, what is humanism?
There is a huge tension between environmentalism and humanism. And generally they get conflated. If you're a humanist, then you're also likely to be an environmentalist. Humanism is clearly Christian. Humanism is basically Christianity.
Okay, got interrupted. Here we go again.
A huge tension between environmentalism and humanism. And generally they get conflated. If you're a humanist, then you're also likely to be an environmentalist. Humanism is clearly Christian. Humanism is basically Christianity without Christ.
Sorry, Steven Pinker. Sorry, Sam Adams. It's basically Christianity without Christ. It's that via media that he's taught to Glenn Scrivener. That's humanism. That's what it is. Secular humanism. That's what it is.
Because it's founded on the idea that humans are special. And that's a theological notion. And it goes back to the book of Genesis and the idea that God created man and woman in his image. Yeah. And that affords an incredible dignity to humans. I mean, there's no other belief system that offers anything like that to humans.
And it's not just, some people then jump in and say, well, you've got Buddhists and Hindus, they revere life. Yeah, they do. But there's a hierarchy here, and it's humans at the top of the hierarchy. The Bible reveres life. You have the end of the book of Jonah. You have should not God not be concerned about the people of Nineveh and many cows too? It's God values those things, but humanity is at the top of the hierarchy. Humanism, it's right there in the word.
And to say that humans have a special status, that you can have something called humanism, is clearly drawing on that, even if humanists don't necessarily want to acknowledge that. Against that, environmentalism is founded on the conviction that humans are bad for the planet, and increasingly bad for the planet, and that we are poisoning it, and we're wiping out vast numbers of species, have wiped out vast numbers of species, that there are too many of us, that we're spreading everywhere, and probably the best thing for the planet would be if we'd never existed. And that being so, perhaps we should all just, wipe ourselves out.
You've summed it up pretty well.
So there is clearly a tension there between the notion that humans are great and the kind of implicit idea that we're all a plague. And so the way that this is squared is to try and campaign for the reduction of human influence on the planet without facing up to the obvious way to reduce human influence on the planet, which is to wipe out humanity.
Well, some of them do. Some of them, the voluntary human extinction movement.
And so it does. And so there is always the chance that that environmentalism will fade into a kind of Nazi style or pagan style, in which the idea that that humans do have a special status is overturned. And in fact, nature, other species, they come to seem more important, and humanity is cast as a kind of plague, which is powerfully and fundamentally opposite to the Christian perspective. But it's kind of testimony to the enduring hold of Christianity and its assumptions on people who live in the West, that there's not much uptake for that. I mean, clearly there are people on the fringes of the Green movement who do think that, but they are seen as problematic.
Would you like you, Tom, given what you said earlier, to know, if you don't know already, that the Nazis were fanatically green? A lot of the idea.
Absolutely,
ideas.
yes, they were, and they were able to be, their distinctive form of green was a very pagan and posthumanist one.
Yeah.
Because of course the Nazis absolutely, at the heart of their philosophy, their sense of what was good, was a conscious repudiation of the two great moral fundamentals of Christianity. One, that all human beings are created in the image of God, that they're all, there's a fundamental equality among humans. The Nazis say no, not at all. Actually, there is Greek and Jew, and the Jews are a lower form, and we should have no compunction about getting rid of them, because their other thing that they reject is the idea that the weak have, or the oppressed or the tortured have any claim on the strong, and they say no, the strong should do what they like. And so in a sense, I think that's what's enabled Christian morals and values to endure as effectively as it has, even though the habit of Christian worship and faith has faded, because the West is haunted by a kind of subliminal understanding of what happens when Christianity goes, because we've seen it with the Nazis. We know what happens when you get rid of the idea that all humans are created in the image of God, and we know what happens when you get rid of the idea that the weak have a kind of have rights.
Now, what's interesting here is that, if you look at 20th century history, it's fascinating, because in certain elements after Darwin very much went into social Darwinism. And again, the Scopes trial in Dayton, Tennessee with William Jennings Bryan was actually all about this. This was Bryan's point, that he saw this movement going and he wanted to stop it. Now, he wanted to stop it by attacking the scientific underpinnings of it, but this is the battle that was fought, and it didn't really end. Read documents from the, broadly speaking, eugenics in the 20s and 30s. It wasn't until Nazism that suddenly everybody starts kind of putting that stuff away. And this again goes to Alistair McGrath's idea that we work this stuff out in time, and then when we see it fully in front of us, we're like, oh no, we don't want to go there. But the problem is so a society sees this, and so you've got, obviously Jewish communities after the Holocaust. Never forget. Well, what do you mean never forget? We have to institutionalize this. We have to create, in a sense, a holy book. We have to create sacredness so that we don't repeat these things. This is the process by which we're doing this stuff. And the difficulty that we're having right now is that we're, as C.S. Lewis often says, we're cutting off the branch that we're sitting on in terms of, well, what's at the root of this? Well, the stresses we're seeing is like we're floating away from this, but we think that we're all riders and not elephants. Well, what do the elephants need? The elephants need to be working on this stuff all the time and living it out in their normal life and living it out and as they're growing up. And I mean, this all gets built into a society. It's not just these lovely ideas that we have on top. I was watching someone had posted on Twitter this thing from LeBron James where he has some children and they're just chanting no to violence, and I thought I was looking at some evangelical Sunday school classroom, because and what I know is that doesn't work. Just telling, well, here's the goal. Oh yeah, we all gain moral status by talking about this goal. Yeah, but when things get rough, you revert back to what has been reinforced in you from the beginning. So then you say, okay, here's your goal. How can you reinforce that? You're going to have to build it up every week. You're going to have to build it up in your mind and in your heart. It's going to have to be part of you. It's going to be your formation. It's going to be something that you sacrifice for. And if it doesn't get in at that level, it'll never stand the trial that will come upon you.
Which they can claim against the strong, because we've seen it in the form of Nazism. So what's happened is that
And what he's about to say here is just brilliant. And I've heard him say it a few times, and it took me a few times to get my mind around it. And I thought, oh, that's exactly right.
We no longer need the devil because we have Hitler. And we no longer need hell because we have Auschwitz. And we no longer need heretics because we have Nazis. And I think that explains the readiness of people who are essentially promoting Christian values and assumptions without Christian belief to level the charge of Nazi at almost anyone who disagrees with them.
That's very interesting. And I think...
And you see, so what happens here in these... And part of my criticism of woke religion has been, well, you're taking the values, but you're ignoring the method. Well, and this is where I get into some fights with anti-racists, because I say, look at the method of Dr. King. It was, you love your enemies into submission. It sounds manipulative, but you love your enemies into submission, even though you might die in the process. You know, where would someone get an idea like that? Jesus. You love your enemies. You just keep loving them even when they kill you. Well, who would say such a thing? That'll never work. And yeah, you wind up dead. Well, that's exactly right. And that's why the Christian story is as it is. And the disciples fully understood what crucifixion meant, and they fully understood its terror. And so they quivered in a hidden room in Jerusalem while only the women and children would watch Jesus crucified. And then he rose from the dead. And then you read in the book of Acts, the religious authorities who had participated in the killing of Jesus see his disciples, and they say, why are they so bold? They're so bold because they've already seen how this plays out. They were resurrected. You say, yeah, but they killed Peter and Paul and they didn't rise from the dead. And Christians say, just you wait. Well, what do you mean wait? It's been 2,000 years. Yeah, you might wait a while. And then if you're skeptical, you say, well, there's no resurrection. I don't believe Peter and Paul are going to rise, but I sure am glad somebody's doing it. Because I sure would rather live in a society where they value the weak, because, I might be strong I might be physically strong in my 20s. I might be socially strong in my 50s and 60s. But someday I'm going to be old. And right now in our society, we're old for a really long time. And what are you going to do when you're old? Well, you're old and worthless. Read the Romans. Read how many people got knifed and poisoned. And, there was a coup and you topple them when you show this. The first sign of weakness. That's how it works, right? Don't show weakness, because once you show weakness, they'll be all over you. What happens in a society where weakness becomes valued, and we care for the dispossessed, and we care for the weak, and we care for the minority, and we even treat our enemies with love. Well, that's the world I want to live in. Yeah, but can you really live in that if you don't really believe that it's affordable? Well, what do you mean affordable? Well, what I hear most often underneath, people seldom say it directly, is Christianity is irresponsible. Why should I pour out my life for people who are undeserving? Well, what's at the heart of Christianity? A man who poured out his life for a world that was undeserving. And again, we think, I don't want to live that way, but I sure want my neighbor to. Well, read that meditation on Molech in Slate Star Codex. This little interesting story about, a fishing, people sharing a fishery, and, the scientist comes and says, well, this is what you have to do to take care of your fishery. And, everybody takes care of it except one. And then when everybody sees that one person not taking care of the fishery, why should I bear the burden for my neighbor? What kind of sap are you to go out and die for a stranger? Right? Right, Steven Pinker? Yeah, but this is exactly the thing we need, Steven Pinker says. Well, that's right, but it's not Christian. It's not Christian? What's that cross about? It's just silly.
You're absolutely spot on as well.
Thank you
But I mean, the use of Nazi and Hitler, everything being literally everything I don't like is Hitler, has become such a trope of the last 20 years.
But it's and I think that it's coincided with the kind of ongoing retreat of confessional Christianity.
Yeah.
But it kind of begs a question, which is, what if people turn around and say, yeah, and what recourse then do you have to say, well, you know, we should care for the weak, or all human beings are equal? Because if you don't have the theological justification that's provided by Christian myth, by Christian theodicy, by the great inheritance of writings from the church, what recourse do you have to justify that? If someone turns around and says, well, actually, I'm a massive racist and I think we should kill all the Jews, how do you, beyond saying, well, you're a Nazi, and then they turn around and say, yeah, I'm a Nazi, what then do you do? What recourse do you have?
You and I both spend time on Twitter. I probably get given a harder time than you because I'm more
right wing.
Right wing, whatever. Yeah, I'm less emollient, I think. Is
I think it would be hard to be.
Less of a kind of greaser. I'm just like really nasty, personal, aggressive stuff, full of hate. I'm surprised by how often, when you look at the identity of the person tweeting it, they're a self-professed Christian or a Quaker or one of those Buddhists, you know, the ones that do the kind of,
Buddhism, not my thing.
No, but yeah, not that kind of real, but not the Oriental Buddhism, but the kind of the Japanesey one where they, well, whatever. Anyway, but I'm just, it strikes me as odd the number of self-professed Christians out there who really don't understand the basics of Christianity.
Well, it goes back to the paradox at the heart of Christianity that you feel that you are right, and so therefore you have the right to, indeed, Christ says, go out and spread the gospel to the corners of the world. Yeah. So you feel that, you have to be evangelical about it. You have the good news, and people who reject your good news, you have to try and either persuade them or kind of bully them into giving that up. But if you push the bullying too far, if you become too assertive, if you become too domineering, then you risk becoming, you're not Christ. You're the Roman soldiers who are taking Christ out and nailing him to the cross, and that's always the risk. And the greatest fictional meditation on that is in the short story in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, The Grand Inquisitor, where Jesus comes back, and the Grand Inquisitor, he's busy burning everyone. He arrests Jesus, and he comes into his cell and says, I know you're Jesus, but I'm still going to burn you.
So, in other words, Christians not being Christians. Christians not being Christians, being this sort of Christian, a little Christian, not enough Christian, and then when a real one comes along, everybody says, wow, that's amazing. I don't know if I want to be that, but I sure want that around. So, and watch the rest of this video, because he goes into, and again, over time, I'm probably going to play most of this video in one video or another, because there's just so much good stuff in it. And then he gets into this question, which the church continues to have to wrestle with. Well, see, the problem with Christianity is just that it's so costly. Everybody says, well, I want to be like Jesus, until you show them the cross, and it's like, well, that's not the part I wanted. I wanted, what the Galilean part, where you did, where you did miracles and gave away stuff and were immensely popular, and everybody wanted to make you king. Well, let me tell you something. They'll make you king. They'll want to make you king one day, and they'll shout, crucify him on the next Friday. And so, or Thursday. John, synoptics, all this detail. Anyway, so all the way back to cherry picking. It's an orchard there. It's an orchard. And if you really want to deal with history, one of the things that we note from the IDW, it's lacking historians. And this history is just too obvious and too fundamental. So this video is probably pretty long, so I'll end it here. I've not yet really figured out the process by which to make short videos, but I make the videos I can. So thanks for watching.